So we might get started. So welcome everybody, and new faces, some we haven't seen before. Lovely to have you here, and it's lovely to have Tracey here to present today. So Tracey is, she's going to present, her topic is leading a supervision. And Tracey is a DMT graduate. She graduated in 1999 from IDTAA. She's got a wide focus in her work, works widely, but she's focused on teenagers with emotional and behavioural issues. She worked as a special ed teacher and also with adolescent, as an adolescent worker. And she's now the CEO of 10 Security Training, focusing on somatics and movement education. So I'll hand it over to Tracey. Thank you. You're muted, Tracey.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, what I was saying, hi. I am looking around who's here, and there's many of you that are not actually students, are graduates yourselves. Raise your hand if you are currently studying dance movement therapy. And those that haven't got their cameras on, can you please put them on? Especially you, Mariana, I want to see what you look like. There she is, Mariana. I don't know why, I can't really see very clearly. It's my brightness. Yeah, how's that? It went down to dim. Now I see the light. Oh gosh. Okay, so yeah, Mariana's about to start in May. And who else said they were a student? One, Anna. And can you just tell me how you're studying, where you're at in it, just so I know to pitch what we're looking at here?
I've just completed the first year out of Auckland.
From the University of Auckland, or from the
from Dance Movement Therapy in New Zealand.
Okay, great. And so everybody else has completed a training course? Yeah. Okay. I hope so. Connor, have you done some training in DMT? You got any experience? Our fearless leader. Okay. So today, as this series has been, a little bit about those of us that are working in the field, sharing what we're doing with particular populations. And today, I was presenting on a population that I've worked with for many, many years and know a lot about, and it is very dear to my heart, is troubled adolescents. And the reason I got into that really was that I trained as a high school teacher way back, and my first posting was to a school which, if I survived a week at that school, then I would give myself a large brandy, probably at the end of every day. Every Monday morning there was a police car, there were all sorts of things. The very first school social that myself and a second year teacher were responsible for, some hoons came along the street, a girl got out of her car, was hit by the car, and she was instantly killed. So we had 150 students in all sorts of disarray. So I've had a lot to do with traumatized adolescents. And then working in special ed, I saw different types of trauma, sometimes acquired brain injury. And then I moved into private practice and was also on a contract with Child and Adolescent Services. So what happened when they realized I was doing dance movement therapy, and they were seeing quite, extraordinary results in the school system where I was working in the skills, the life skills unit for kids that couldn't go into normal classrooms because they were too disruptive. Now, thinking back, this was I first started doing it in the early 90s, all the way through to 2010 was the last time I was in a school. And it wasn't so accepted about ADHD and all of that sort of thing. It was just starting to come in. So kids were just seen as naughty. I don't think the diagnosis of ADHD is the answer to every child's behavioural problems. In fact, what I would like to present today through a particular case study is a young boy that I was working with, and I did get a few of them. They were children who were wards of the state, were in foster care from a quite early age. And with many foster children, it's not just them on their own, it's, you know, that all of the siblings, they don't always go to the same family. They can be split up. They're in one family for, could be 3 years, could be 3 months, could be 3 days. They never know. So security is not something that they've grown up with. And the more that I have developed my practice over the years and gone a lot more into somatics and neuroscience and studied attachment theory from the perspective of why are these children behaving so badly, you know, what is going on, you can you can come from a number of perspectives. But I think with all of the people that we work with in our practice, we have to look at healthy attachment, what has gone on, and question it in terms of the client. So I thought that I would actually just recap a little bit about what am I talking about in terms of attachment. What is good attachment? Because you hear it. Can you just raise your hand? Everybody, when I say attachment theory, you know what I'm talking about. When we're talking about people like with complex trauma, absolutely acting out, adolescents, small children and babies who are not, you know, developing, growing, we have to look at what is the state of the health of the initial attachment, the mother and child attachment. So I'm just going to share with you, just so we're all on the same page. And can everybody see that? Okay, so attachment theory from the perspective of working with teenagers. And I love this image because attachment is just what it says. It is that physical attachment, that connection to the primary caregiver. So through a mother-child dyad. So what are we talking about? You know, what is attachment? We have, you know, a theory. It's even got its own theory that has been written about a lot, but essentially it's that bond, the bond between the primary caregiver and the infant. Infant being that pre-verbal little baby from the time it comes out of the womb. And there's no doubt has a lasting impact on our entire lives. And it also impacts on our brain development. And this is the bit that interests me in working with teenagers, because that attachment, that being able to trust, completely yield to the caregiver. You know how a baby will snuggle in and they trust that you will take care of them. They learn this through that physical mirroring. The mirror neurons help them develop a sense of, called empathy, but a dance that happens between that primary caregiver and themselves. And in particular, in terms of brain development, it supports that important part of our brain, the limbic system, which houses the role or the function of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. And it supports the development of the prefrontal cortex. So we're looking at places where individuals make decisions, where we respond emotionally from those parts of our brain. And this is what I see with teenagers. The emotional response that they have is completely out of proportion to the situation in front of them. And so this comes from the fact that the success or the good enough attachment will impact how we experience states of stress and how we behave in relationships, both as adolescents and adults. And see, with adolescents, they, due to the hormonal changes and things, everything is louder, everything is more exaggerated. So we see that, the acting out is greater. That's where they push boundaries. I mean, that's the role of a teenager, to learn right and wrong through pushing boundaries. And it also impacts on how we communicate and socialize. And the formal definitions, attributed to attachment theory come from some of these theorists. I'm sure you've all heard of Bowlby. He wrote about it at length. He was one of the first theorists to write about it. And Ainsworth talked about a variety of different attachment styles. Main and Solomon added something called disorganized attachment style. So they're sort of like putting them into subcategories. And Schaefer and Emerson looked at the various different stages of attachment. And that's really important because depending on where the child is, thinking about kids that are in foster care who've been moved around, their ability to really find that co-regulation with a primary caregiver is interrupted each time they go to a different family home. And then you can't underestimate the role of the attachment to a child, to their biological parent. It's a bond stronger than we can really ever understand. So the different stages that I'm going to refer to here are the pre-attachment stage, and that's the really first one from birth to 3 months. And babies, you will see evidence of them not showing a particular attachment to a caregiver at that stage. At this stage, they're fairly open to whoever is the primary caregiver, so long as it's consistent care. Then we have the indiscriminate stage of 6 weeks to 7 months, where they do start to show a preference between primary and secondary caregivers. The discriminate stage is that the rest of the first year of life, so from 7 to 11 months, there's a strong preference for a specific individual caregiver. That's where maybe you might be sending a child to be looked after by a grandparent or taking them to childcare, and they start to actually, cry when they leave their primary caregiver because they recognise the distinction between number one and others. And then there's multiple stages. In the multiple stage is the final stage, 9 months and on, and they begin to show strong emotional bonds to other caregivers because that initial attachment has established itself with firm roots, and there is adequate co-regulation between primary caregiver and infant. Now, if the primary caregiver, which we see a lot with kids that I have worked with in the past, has not had successful attachment themselves, then we've got intergenerational lack of attachment. So, I'm sure I'm speaking to topics that many of you know, but if the mother, primary caregiver, hasn't learned, isn't co-regulated, doesn't trust herself, then it's very difficult for her to demonstrate that to the infant. And the different styles of attachment are one that we would like to move towards, which is secure attachment, and we have anxious attachment, avoidant, and disorganized. And here is a really brief summary of the definitions of those styles. So just think about it as it's a way to explain stress that people experience in relationships. It's a way to understand the behaviours you use to manage stress in relationships. So it's totally relevant to relating to other human beings. So if it's secure, you can communicate your feelings directly, you feel emotionally close to your partner, you're flexible and cooperative. So these are behavioural traits as adults. An anxious attachment style would be that an individual is more dependent on a partner for their self-worth. It's not derived from within. And this is what I start to see with these troubled teenagers. There's a lot of emotional sensitivity, so they'll fly off the handle a lot quicker, or they'll withdraw for greater lengths of time. They can be really demanding. If their needs aren't met immediately, they will act out, throw tantrums, that sort of thing. There's a fear around losing relationships, which the irony is that kids that I've worked with, they push everybody away so that they don't then get close enough because of the fear of losing. And one that's important for adolescents here is that they might fight hard to get attention and approval from partner. So that's as an adult definition. You see it with kids, and when I was working in large groups within high schools, always the class clown, the one that's trying to get attention. And it can be they always come late, they forget their homework, they come in and slam their books down. That's if they have books. Mostly they don't have books. They're the ones that cause you as the teacher probably a little more grief than you'd like in a day's work. And then just to show you the avoidant one is they're very independent, really self-reliant, don't need you, don't help me. You'll see it even as a toddler, really. Don't like conflict, will avoid it, yet they can be the ones that actually create the conflict. So there's a little bit of a paradox there. They just don't want to be seen as a failure, and they will, as adults, put a high value on success. And so they strive, they really do overachieve. However, in adolescence, it doesn't always manifest like that in the beginning, because an adolescent is so much more aware of how they look in relation to others. So they're more likely not to try and then bag everything out around them, particularly those their fellow students that might be, compliant, good academically, have we not got 1,000 words for what we might call them, depending on the generation you come from? They might be a swot, a nerd, a do-good, or whatever they are. And the last one is the disorganized or fearful one. And this we see when there has been some sort of abuse in the early attachment years. And so as an adult, and then also in adolescence, they're seeking closeness and avoid it. So there's that push-pull type of thing. So you will see them going from one peer group to another a lot, like their whole life depends on that group of friends, and they would absolutely do anything not to be shamed within that group. And then they might suddenly, it's like, no, don't like them now, I want to move schools, got to go, or they'll run. They're very much kids that I'd worked with who were extremely, in some ways, dangerous to themselves and to society. They would abscond and just disappear. And I'm speaking about a particular boy. I'll give you more details in a moment. And they do, they can be alone. Often they're the ones that might end up living on the streets more because they just don't want to be seen. And it's best to sort of suffer their pain alone. So that is a bit of a summary. I know it's a quick look, but that's just to help you understand where I tend to come from when I am working with these children. And the last slide I'll show you is how this relates to our modern understandings of neuroscience. So attachment and our relationships affect the way our brain develops as a child, as I said a bit earlier. And the neuroscience is wonderful because it provides evidence on the brain development of this securely attached brain and also of traumatized and disorganized brains. Because ultimately, thanks to our nervous system, we're wired to function for success, to thrive, to grow and develop. And when there's been an intrusion, or there has not been that opportunity for successful attachment, then we don't thrive. And that's really what I saw with these kids. They just hadn't had the opportunity to thrive. And just if you learn nothing else about neuroscience, know that we have to trust it. It's a simple yet extremely clever system that keeps us on the straight and narrow. And we have so many signs that let us know that we're not on the straight and narrow. And we're starting to see that with much more acceptance of relaxation and breath work and somatic experiencing and that sort of thing. I'm just going to stop the screen there. And does anybody have any questions I'd like to ask before I go on?
Tracey, I can't remember who said it, but because I come at this from the experience of also being a La Leche League leader and supporting moms breastfeeding their babies. But you know, when we talk about a baby, we can't talk about a baby as separate because there's always another. You know, our babies are born so, undeveloped. I mean, they're still so, because their brain can't grow faster or we couldn't birth them. So, you know, they're so immature, and that's why they need another.
Yeah, that's a great reminder for us, you know, because it makes, when I think like a baby horse, a foal or a calf, they're born and they can actually walk, whereas we take, 12 months to get there. You know, we are pretty useless on our own. So yeah, that is it. We are self and other from birth to 12 months. And some of us are fortunate to have good enough mothers. Many of us, don't. So it's just, thank God we've got these access to knowledge and theory that we can actually heal those wounds. And that's what I'm saying, through this work as dance movement therapists, we can heal most damage that is done in those pre-verbal years. And when I trained, like I did my training 30 years ago now, I remember one experiential going, yeah, every single thing that is an issue for an adult, we trace it back to those first 2 years of life, the pre-verbal stages. And that's what's so unique about dance movement therapy in comparison to other therapies. Nobody else got any questions? Who does have any experience working with teenagers? A few of you, yeah. They're a unique group, and I'll just say this, those of you who do have children that aren't teenagers yet, nothing prepares you for your own. Don't think knowing all this theory is going to help you, because it might help you understand a bit, but it doesn't take away from the drama, the trauma, the fun times and the bad times, because they're yours. So we have an attachment there. When we're working as therapists, we are not attached to them. We can simulate through really skilled therapy the attachment that they haven't had as children. So we can take them through those stages again as adults. And that's the brilliance of it. They don't have to relive the stories of not having a mother who was there to co-regulate with. We teach them how to co-regulate through our interaction with them. And so that's where it's just such a wonderful thing that we can offer these people that have lived, like especially when you're dealing with people as adults who've lived with being dysfunctional in their daily life, you know, with some of those traits of the different attachment styles. We can help them get past that, and particularly through the body. And interestingly enough, through the last 2 years with COVID, as the whole world has become a little bit more traumatized, even now I'm seeing with students and clients, the levels of resilience we had 3 years ago is not the same as we've got now. We're affected. So I noticed in my own private practice that a lot more clients, new clients that came to me, had greater evidence of complex trauma, because what was happening in the world was bringing up what had been able to be pushed down or to just be lived with. And also, because people were in lockdowns in various places around the world, they were starting to realize that my body's important. I need to move it. I need to get out. And so I saw an increase in the interest in somatic and dance movement therapy work. So if there's anything positive to come out of the COVID thing, that's the one. That we got seen a bit more. And one of the other things that Maeve and Angela asked me to talk about was, if you're working in an organization, an ingonation, I was going to call it, organization, speaking a little bit about lines of management and how you work. Is that sort of what you wanted, Maeve? Like how you want to...
Sorry, he's in the wrong spot. Yeah, just how you manage working in an organisation. Who do you liaise with, and how does that work?
Yeah, and look, you know, how long is the ball of string is sort of like how many, same sort of thing, how many different options are there in different organisations? Not all organisations are created equally, as you probably all know. In my own experience, I was very fortunate in having a social worker within it was child and adolescent services, but it was a particular centre set up for children that needed additional help. And they could have been, they were children who had, you know, physical and health problems. They were kids that had developmental learning problems. There were children who had behavioural problems, but it was this centre where they could come to, and there were like a number of social workers and psychologists, and there was a family therapy group. For me, and I want to say this to those students that are here today, that yes, I had my secure job in a high school where I was working in special ed, so I could do some of my clinical placement work there, but I needed to work with a different population. So I actually knew the social work, one of the social workers at this place, and this happened to be where I started, was in Hobart, at a place called Clare House. And that social worker knew what I was doing and understood the benefit of it. So that gave me a way of being able to get a leg in or the leg up, you know, a way to meet the rest of the team. So he organised for me to have a meeting to speak to the whole team, and they asked me to establish clearly what it was that dance movement therapy offered that wasn't being offered through the therapies that they were already offering. So my advice to any students looking to get clinical placements is know what the hell you're doing. Why is dance movement therapy any different to any other therapy? Is it different to providing dance classes after school? Yes, it is the therapy. It's not therapeutic. You have to know that. But how? What makes the difference? And even if you go to the DTAA website and you look up the definition of what is dance movement therapy, and you just learn it off by heart over and over again, and then move it so that you embody it. The next time you are struggling with an assignment you've got, next time you're struggling with the client you have, struggling with your partner, your children, take yourself away and start to move. And don't stop until your body tells you to stop. And then you'll know what dance movement therapy is, because you will then journal, what was it that I experienced there? What am I experiencing in my body now? And I know, Krista, you know this because I bang on about it in our training, is a somatic check-in. What am I experiencing sensationally now? And it is a skill that you have to develop, because when I first do it with a new group of students or with clients when I first start working with them, is they tell me, I'm angry, I'm really sad. That's not a somatic experience or a somatic sensation. A somatic sensation is a fluttering in my chest, a tightness in my right temple. So it's a word that expresses the movement or lack of movement inside now. And I developed that way back when I was working with teenagers, because that's all they can relate to, is that physical sensation. So you meet them where they're at. So things like this is what I said in this meeting. I also had examples of how it had worked. So I brought some theory with me. And also at that stage, I was working with, which came through the school I was working with, and then I ended up working more with children who have terminal illnesses. So I had a lot to do with the Cystic Fibrosis Association and working with children for years with them. And that taught me that the way that the dance therapy worked with them, who basically are traumatized their whole life, their life is traumatic. And imagine knowing from the first time you could understand cognitively who you are, you knew you were going to die before anybody else of your peers was going to die. So they have this knowledge. So working with the body with them was so, so good. And so anyways, I got into that place, and they asked me if I would join the family therapy team. And that worked really well, because when we got families together and got them to move together, it was extraordinarily powerful. So working with kids that were acting out and difficult, getting them to have a dyadic union with their siblings and their parents under supervision, when nobody felt like they were the odd one out. Everyone was engaged. So that's where your experience of running groups has to be, number one, and understanding everybody's role within the group. And so from there, I established that what we were doing was a little bit different. And then after that, one of the other social workers came to me and asked, do you think this would work with survivors of domestic violence? And of course I said, yes. That's the other thing. You just got to say, yes, this works, then work out how it works later. So we ran a 10-week program for survivors of domestic violence. We were very, very clear that it wasn't for women who had survived domestic violence, to actually broaden it to any person who was in a home situation where it wasn't safe. It turned out that only women were in the program, and their children. And what it was designed for was re-establishing that connection between mother and children. So again, revisiting the attachment. And with that specific interruption like domestic violence and that fear, so there's a lot of fear attachment where you've got survivors of domestic violence, is the kids actually get a little forgotten, because the mother is so busy trying to survive and protect, she actually doesn't have time to have a relationship with. So that was something that I had not actually thought about. But then when we ran the group and looked at what were our program goals for those 10 weeks, it was, this is what we're talking about. And when I saw them for the first time, they skirted around each other. They didn't know how to come together. So that's what we had the privilege of being able to facilitate that to happen. Now, when you're working with the population, like the children with behavioural problems, these adolescents that I was working with outside of this in private practice, I didn't have the privilege of working with the parents because it was beyond that stage. They were no longer, or if ever, lived with their parents. So it's a different way of working. So multiple ways to work towards healing from the same theoretical framework of attachment theory. Anybody got any questions about that?
Not so much a question, Tracey, but a comment. So I have a client, she doesn't come to me anymore, but she had chronic PTSD from being in a domestic violence situation. And she homeschooled her daughter, and the daughter used to come into the therapy session because this was hands-on, it wasn't dance movement therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We were going to work towards that, but she stopped coming, so perhaps it wasn't for her. But I did notice that the daughter was extremely responsible for mum. She was probably about 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And she, yes, it was, she was way beyond her years. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic to see, and would have liked to work with them, but didn't.
Yeah, and so if we went back to our styles of attachment, you see that very much in, let me get to this, in the avoidant. They're very self-reliant, high value on being successful in avoiding the conflict. You see that with kids, with parents, you know, and I wouldn't say dysfunctional, but, you know, facing difficulties. The only way they can identify or actually protect themselves is to make sure that the victim, who is their parent, is taken care of. And so they actually become the parent often. And when, you know, we're always generalizing, but we have to theorize. But when they become adults themselves, you find that they're often ones who don't have children, don't have partnerships, just avoid putting themselves into any situation where they could repeat the patterns of their parents. Quite often they repeat the patterns of their parents anyway, because that's the only patterning they know. Yeah, parentification, yeah. And it's a hard role for, you know, an 8-year-old to play, especially if there are younger children, and there often are more than one child, sadly. The case study that I was going to show you, that I will show you, I'm going to put it up there now and introduce you to my boy. Share the screen. So yeah, I'm going to take you through a 5-part session with him. But he, as a background, his name was Sam. He was the most delightful child when I saw him. But often he would come in, he was 11, and his main goal was to be so bad that he would get sent to a detention centre for boys, because that's where his big brother was. And this kid tried his best, but fortunately for him, his social worker and foster parent saw that this kid was worth more than that. And so somehow or other, he ended up with me, and I saw him once a week for best part of 9 months. And he taught me so much about how to break into cars, how to firebomb cars, how to get food from anywhere, how to go to a restaurant, not pay, you name it. I could have been best, thief or whatever. And you see, the skills you need to work with these kids is never be shocked. Have one other story up your sleeve that can be better than theirs. And I just went, my tack with him was, tell me more. Do you mean I don't ever have to buy a car again? I can just do this? And then I would go, so what would happen if the person that I took the car from had to take their 3-year-old to the doctor because she had an asthmatic attack, and I'd sort of make up stories. So everything that he was doing had, a personal relationship too. And in the beginning, it was like, well, oh, fuck them, they don't know what they've got. You can imagine the anger and the barrage and stuff. But we got through that, and we got through it by moving the body. So I would let him talk. Then we would act things out through movement. So we would get movement sequences happening. There was always room for creativity. There would be structure in the beginning where I would give him a particular task. We would then, as I say, sort of make a dance out of some of his stories. We would make a different ending to stories. So the creativity was always, let's do a different ending. So it could be through the story of one day, or it could be through the, like a choreographic task that had a theme to it. And the main thing towards the end of our time together was working on how he could have a relationship with his big brother without the initial pathway that he thought was the cleverest way to get there, and working with his social worker at the same time to know when he was having visits with the brother, was he going to school? He was going to school spasmodically to a local school where I actually did know the teachers, and most of the time, more time, he wasn't going to school than he was. And the thing about this age group, like I think he, as I said, he was 11, so he was almost 12 by the time I finished working with him, is their health isn't really an issue at that stage, because when we're that young, you can pretty well manage a lot of stress and not eat so well and all of that, and your systems don't fall apart except for your nervous system. And so in working with him, trying to make the activities within the dance experientials to be more bringing up the heightened, bringing the breath up, so getting him to be like heart rate up, getting the heart rate up, and then consciously going, let's take it down to here, take it down to here, take it down to here, and getting him to recognize it at every level. And there was like the first time that we started reading about somatic psychotherapy, there's a lot of reference to Wilhelm Reich's work about calming, breath, all of this sort of thing. And we do that inherently in dance movement therapy, but it is useful to use the terminology of some of the other modalities that are only just, getting into what we've been doing forever. It just helps with your language when you're speaking to other types of therapists who haven't experienced the benefits of dance movement therapy. So I'm going to show you typically how I plan my sessions. Having come through the IDTIA system myself, and something that I have taken from that and use with my own students, is the dance movement therapy 5-part session that was introduced to me from Marcia Leventhal. And she probably still uses it. It's just like, it's a framework. It's like writing an essay, having a beginning, a middle, and an end. All therapies will have this. Anything you do in life have to get warmed up into it to get to the nitty-gritty. of it, and then you have to come back out of it and finish it so it's got a closure. This would be my major advocacy of the difference between what is therapy and what is therapeutic. We are consciously taking someone in off the street, getting them into their bodies, asking them to shed all of their thoughts and anxieties, to go into a deeper place, and then we slowly and carefully bring them up out of it to a closing position where we might conclude with a gesture, a drawing, or chatting about what we're going to do next week, but bringing them back into groundedness. And often if you're just doing dance and it's therapeutic, and I've been to many of those sorts of things, some of the ecstatic dance experiences, there's no closure, there's no bringing you back to a grounding, and that's the difference. So in this particular session, which was pretty well session 1, the warm-up was just getting him to walk around the space, familiarise with the place that we'd be working with over the next few weeks. I always ask, what's your opinion? What do you think about this place? What do you think we could improve about it? So that they're offering a bit of themselves from the beginning. And for me to observe muscle control, ability to concentrate, and the different shapes that the individual's body is forming. And there's an exercise that I do with kids, especially if they're very energetic. I call it the 8-4-2-1. I put on music and they have to develop or come up with a shape that their body has never been in ever in their entire life. And they go, no, it's not possible. I said, it's completely possible. And I'll just demonstrate. So demonstrating, mirroring, very important with this group of people. If, however, you're working in a group, I'll just digress a little bit here, it gets more challenging. You get 4 of these difficult people in the one group, 6 of them. I don't think I could do this now, but this is something I did probably 15 years ago. I walked into this very difficult high school, and I was given a group of children that basically their teachers wanted to get rid of them, and they were all grade 9 students. So I'd work with them once a week, and they're sitting there, they're standing there, you know, the posture of a teenage boy, you know, this basically the hips thrust forward and this. I'm not giving you anything, teacher. And this teacher was still pretty little, and I'm like, this is it, make or break, Tracey, what are you going to do? I said, what would you like to get out of this? Well, I reckon I'd be better off going to the gym and I could just thrash you. I said, really? Do you think you could lift up everybody in this room? And yeah. And I said, well, how about you try and do it the same way as me? So I walked up and I just had this dance lift. You know, when you contemporary dance lift, you learn how to lift with your own body. So I actually got him to put his hands on my legs, and I said, do a handstand, and I flipped him up like this. And the whole class just went, oh my God, how did you do that? And I had them. I actually had them for the rest of the time. It could have gone pear-shaped, but I mean, you got to be careful. You don't do things that are not going to work. So that way they were like, dude, we can do this. I said, what about bringing in some rap music and that sort of thing? So, you know, you've got to get down and dirty when you're working with teenagers. You've got to know what the latest music is. You've got to know what the latest language is. You've also got to teach them some of your adult language, and it's a sharing. So back to this session, in the release, I went into some breath work, you know, the Bartenia core organizing things. We started with starfish and just breathing through the limbs. Then we went into, in the theme, doing lots of swinging, because in terms of his movement preferences, he was very much in the sagittal plane, just that, keeping it in this blinkered look. So taking him into in the horizontal and in the swinging and lilting types of music, and getting him to use, I use the term swing, and he understood what that meant then. Swing did not mean get on a kiddie swing, because I'm no kid, right? You can't tell them that they're kids. And then I find that kids, they love doing a bit of exercise that they can achieve. So your Botania fundamentals are really helpful here. They're a great diagnostic tool for you as well. And with that, giving them the tools of the different movement choices that they've got, he was a bit sports mad, this kid. So for me, who's not sports mad, I had to do a bit of research and learn the language of some of the sporting things. So we had sport themes, and that really helped. And also, how do you get up in the morning? That helped me understand what memory recall he had, because when the nervous system isn't developed really well and they're operating through a hypertonic sympathetic nervous system, and they're in that high, they're releasing high levels of cortisol all the time, they tend to forget things. So their memory's not really good. And then if you put poor nutrition on top of that, it's exacerbated. I also found that he was quite dehydrated, didn't drink a lot of water, because he was always drinking Coke, and back then there was some energy drink called Mother, and so kids got access to this, so they were just hyped up on sugar and caffeine. Then in this particular session, as a cool down or a centering, we found parts other than the hands and feet, but bringing his attention to elbows, fists, shoulders and hips that can move in a strong way and a light way. So playing with effort in this one, and each subsequent session we might work with the other effort qualities, and looking at the contrasts and sequencing, how you could put them together. Sequencing was a really good thing with this group, because their life is so disjointed, and every day, every week, they sort of start a different thing. They could be at a different school, it could be living in a different house, have a different brother or sister. So continuity and stringing things together. So through our dance, we would always finish in a closure with a goodbye dance. And what a goodbye dance is for me is a summary of some of the things that you've done in the session. So bringing some of the gestures that you might have remembered, I'd say, what were the favorite moves today? Give me 3 of them, and just repeat them and repeat them. And then I'd say, so during the week when I'm not around and something's getting difficult, when you feel that somatic sensation of a grab, he used to have a grab here. He'd say, just grabs me here, like a punch. And I'd say, whenever you feel that, do your goodbye dance. And then we made it really micro, so he could do it and no one could see him. And other times I say, if you're with someone, you want to share it, teach it to them as well. So there were different ways he could use this. So that is basically the summary. And we have 5 minutes left. And I'd like to give you the option. Do you just want to get up and move? And I could take you through one of these, or would you like to talk about what you might do next with this person, or any questions that you might have? You're all going to run out and work with troubled teenagers now?
I'd like to know what you would be doing next with them.
It's lucky you're not in the training course now, because you understand. I would say as a task, what would you do with this person next? So first session you saw is pretty full, because I have no idea if he's going to do any of it, right? I might just sit there and suck their thumb and tell me to go get stuffed, you know. So you have to be more prepared. So was a lot in there. But he was a mover, you know, he actually loved it. So I had no trouble getting him to do stuff. So the next session, I knew I could take a little bit longer. So the next session, I actually did ask him to bring me some information about his favorite sport. Guess what his favorite sport was? Wrestling. So I learned quite a bit about wrestling, and not having, I don't know why he was interested. It's not an Australian thing. As Connor will tell you, they do it in high school. And I'm married to an American, and he said it was the most horrific part of his entire high school days because they had to actually wrestle with other sweaty, testosteronic males. And it's just like, and they reckon it's not homophobic. You know, it's weird. But anyway, that's what this kid loved. So so the next session, I said, great, we're going to do a wrestling activity. Now, I did not wrestle with them. Don't wrestle with them. You'll get yourself in trouble. It was doing, so taking it, what are the movements in the wrestling? And so he showed me some, and he did actually bring me a photo. Now, remember, when I first started working with this particular kid, every kid did not have a mobile phone. So it would be different if they had a mobile phone, I imagine. And so I took some of the shapes that the wrestling did. And I said, in order to be a good wrestler, you have to look at the shape of the other person's body, and you have to come in and you fill in the gap. So a bit like puzzles. And so I said, how about you form the shape? I'll mirror it and make it so that it's something that then you can mirror. And so we just did a series of that. Actually, that was more coming into the deeper part of it and the warm up. I always, for the first 6 weeks, I stuck with my 8-4-2-1 exercise, which was, if I can explain that more, I would say hold a shape. So say the shape was this, and so you have to hold it for 8 counts. And I would have really strong beated music, and they had to hold it without a move for 8 counts. And then they'd run around the room for 8 counts, moving. But as soon as the music came on, they had to hold that pose again. So there was going from hold and control to completely moving around, but listening for when the music came on again, and they had to hold it. So that developed his skill of control, release, listening, and observing his own behavior to know what was something he had never done before. And so, yeah, we went with the wrestling theme, and then asking him what did he enjoy about it. Nothing, was all pretty dumb. So why did you do it then? If it was dumb, you know, you can choose in here. And he said, oh, do you reckon it will make me better at wrestling? I said, yeah, you know, you can get really strong. And so just winning him over was the next thing, really winning him over, and not giving up on the goodbye dance. And the first thing when he came back for the second session, and every session, is, how's the goodbye dance going? Has it changed? Show me your gestures. And sometimes it was the same, and sometimes he'd go, I thought that was dumb, so I just added this onto it. So it showed him that I remembered him from last time, that he held importance in my life. So there was, he actually opened up quite quickly, but then there would be dark times too. And another thing that I did have, fortunately, is in the space I was using was also used as a yoga studio. And they had not the new thin rubber mats, they had foam mats that were covered in cotton, and they were like almost the size of a single bed mattress, but there was a whole stack of them in the space. And so when he went into these places, I'd say, okay, build yourself a safe place. It's your cubby. And I think we built mansions and castles and God knows what, but it was something he could create. And then when he was in times where he was really suffering and acting out, I'd say, I think you better build your safe place, and you can talk to me from there. So he'd be behind a mattress and a wall, you know, like a 3-year-old would go like this and say, you can't see me. Same sort of thing with the teenager. So you're sort of working with them. Yeah, you're a big boy, but really he's not. He's still that scared 2-year-old. So yeah.
How long were the sessions, Tracey?
45 minutes. You wouldn't want to do a lot of them back to back, I'm telling you. They're tiring. You know, so, I mean, you know that, Christy, I mean, at the time you worked with the primary school kids, and Christy did a stint, one of her placements, and she'd never run a group before, had you? And she ended up in primary school. She came to me and she said, I don't know if I'm made up for this sort of thing. It was hard work.
I
But,
have extremely fond memories of those 10 weeks with those children.
yeah, it's hard at the time, but you get it.
It was
You are
great.
given a lot.
Yeah.
Tracey, a real practical question. What software do you use to record your notes? Like, I really liked how that was set out. Is that a particular software that you use?
It's an online learning platform called Canvas. Also, I have a template that I make is a editable PDF, so you can type into it. I also do that with my preparation, a 5-part session, but also a form that I use, a client observation record sheet. I only learned this in the last year, the editable PDF one, that you can then type into it as you go, and it makes life so much easier.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, anybody got anything else to say? It's time to finish, but if anybody wants to say anything, share anything, ask anything. Okay, over to you, Maeve. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. It was really informative, and some of your descriptions reminded me of being a young teacher and having been giving a terms dance for these teenagers who were just out of control. I think it put me off, and I didn't have any dance therapists because in those days I think it put me off working with teenagers forever. It was really terrible.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you. And and that one piece of advice where you said something like know why you were doing what you were doing as a dance movement therapy and to move it. I think that's excellent. Really, really valuable.
Yeah, I think that comes from years of being at the bottom of the pecking order. I've never chosen a career where it's acceptable, and that's why I get so much pleasure from it. And when you're right down there at the bottom of the pecking order, you learn how to stand up tall and as I say, yeah, just know what you're doing, know why you're doing it. Okay. Thank you everyone for giving up an hour of your Thursday. It's a wonderful thing that you do. Yeah.
Thanks for the wrestling memories. Oh my God. I have a connection to wrestling. Yes.
Oh, dear.
High school wrestling.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, my husband used to wrestle.
Did he?
Yeah. Yes. And, talk about the disorder that wrestlers get is that they're always trying to stay within their weight range. So even in the 70s, they're putting on plastic suits and trying to lose water weight. Oh my God, what a nightmare. Anyway.
Sounds like ballet. Who wore fishing pants to ballet class to sweat it out?
Yeah.
Everything we do. All right.
Thank you.
On that note, goodbye everyone. Have a great Thursday.
Thank you.